Welcome back. An attempt to begin repatriating thousands of Rohingya Muslims living in camps in Bangladesh has stalled.
This after nearly 300 refugee families refused to go back to Myanmar almost a year after a similar effort failed amid protests. Just last week, the neighbours said they had agreed August the 22nd as the start date for the return of more than 3,000 people cleared by Myanmar.
Members of the Muslim minority, 740,000 of whom fled a military offensive in 2017 that the United Nations likened to ethnic cleansing, are refusing to return without guarantees for their safety and a promise that they will at last be given citizenship by Myanmar. Over 3,000 Rohingya were placed on a list of refugees and approved for repatriation as part of a fresh attempt by the governments of Bangladesh and Myanmar to start sending back some of the more than 1 million refugees living in squalid camps in Cox's Bazar. The Rohingya are not recognized as an official minority by the Myanmar government, which consider them Bengali interlopers, despite many families having lived in the country for generations. The announcement of the repatriation plans last week was met with almost universal condemnation from human rights groups, which stressed the conditions in Myanmar were still highly unsafe for the Rohingya. The new push follows a visit last month to the camps by high-ranking officials from Myanmar, led by Permanent Foreign Secretary Mayet II. Sunday will mark the second anniversary of the crackdown that sparked the mass exodus to the Bangladesh camps. UN investigators say the 2017 violence against Rohingya warrants the prosecution of top generals for genocide, and the International Criminal Court has started a preliminary probe.
For more on this story, we are now joined via Skype by Shabnam Mayet, a South African advocate based at the Johannesburg Bar. She specialises in human rights work and is one of the co-founders of Protect the Rohingya, a South African-based awareness organisation established in 2012. Advocate Mayet, thank you so much for joining us this evening on The Globe.
Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Now, a United Nations fact-finding mission on Myanmar has exposed military business ties and has called for targeted sanctions and an arms embargoes. Do we know who the culprits are and how complex these relations are?
So what the UN fact-finding mission found is that two conglomerates, the Myanmar Economics Holdings Limited and the Myanmar Economics Corporation, together cover around 140 local companies and work with around 49 international companies. They also found that around 14 companies from 7 countries were selling arms to Myanmar. These include Israel, Russia, India, as well as South Africa in 2017. And what they're asking for is a comprehensive arms embargo, and they're saying that business should not be done with companies that are linked directly to the military or to individuals who are linked to the military, and that private businesses should be aware of this as well. Because at the end of the day, there's only been 4 high-ranking military officials, the Commander-in-Chief, Min Aung Hlaing, his deputy, and 2 brigadiers that have been sanctioned on travel bans. And this is just not enough.
All right. Now, with regards to Myanmar and them having long claimed to have been targeting terrorists in this displacement of Rohingya Muslims, is there any truth to this claim so far?
So, the Myanmar government and the Tatmadaw, the military, have been fighting some of the longest civil wars in the world, some more than 50 years. And it is normal for them to call any ethnic minority that is fighting against these brutal violations of their human rights and land grabs terrorists. In fact, since around the 20th of June, there's been an internet shutdown in Rakhine State and 2 other states, making it very difficult to even know what's going on inside. And they're again stating that this is because of the unrest and saying it's about terrorism. But this, of course, is not true. I mean, as you said, Sunday marks the 2nd anniversary of the Rohingya genocide, and 800,000 civilians crossed over the border into Bangladesh, running from arson attacks, arbitrary killings, mass rape, mass murder, and of course the dispossession of around 400 villages. So what the Myanmar government and military have done is very targeted attack on civilians and an ethnic minority in the country.
Do we know how many of the Rohingya remain displaced in Bangladesh and other neighboring countries?
So many Rohingya are in Asia as well as in the UAE. In Bangladesh, we're speaking about 1 million, but no one's really talking about between 500,000 and 1 million that are currently still in Rakhine State, living under the worst conditions, checkpoints, permits to move. They have to ask government permission to get married. They can't go to education institutions. They can't own land. They can't get jobs. They can't access medical. And so, since 1982, when Myanmar revoked the citizenship of the Rohingya, they've implemented apartheid policies across the board. And this is what continues today. So when they're talking about repatriation, it's great that it's stalled, because what will these people be returning to?
Which leads me to the next question of what is the daily life of Rohingya like in Myanmar?
So in Myanmar, it's severe restrictions. From 2012, around 120,000 Rohingya are living in cordoned-off camps under military surveillance. They're not allowed out of the camps without permission. They have to cross checkpoints to even go to the next village a few kilometers away. No access to school, no ability to gather. And of course, Rohingya are very much suffering apartheid policies because it is about their darker skin. The pejorative used by the Rakhine Buddhists is kala, which means black.
Now, a fresh push to repatriate Rohingya refugees to Myanmar appeared to fall flat on Thursday, which is today. Do we know the reasons why?
Of course, the reasons why are that they said that they should come back, right? But they haven't said that they will be allowed back to their land. They haven't said they will be given citizenship, that those accountable for the brutal atrocities, mass rapes and killings of 2017 will be held accountable. And no citizenship. So what exactly are they going back to? I mean, they might very well be going back to the same thing happening to them all over again. And so Rohingya have said very clearly, if there's no dignified, safe, protected return with citizenship, they really have no reason to go back because they've suffered the worst atrocities at the hands of the military.
In New York, UN spokesperson Stefan Dujarric said on Wednesday that repatriations had to be voluntary. Do you think that the UN is deeply involved in trying to bring the Rohingya crisis to an amicable solution?
Well, when they said that the repatriation would start this week, they said it last week, which left them with a very few days for them to actually go and consult Rohingya. And the biggest problem so far has been that Rohingya, although they've suffered, have never been consulted about what it is they would want. And so the UN, of course, in their internal kind of review, found that they looked more at development goals instead of looking at protecting human rights. And there's been severe condemnation in their own internal review of them and their behavior. They're now trying to move that process forward and bring positive change to how they've reacted in the past. Their past representative was sent back. They have a new representative on the ground. We are yet to see what's going to happen. But of course, without the Rohingya agreeing and without actually giving them something to go back to, there's no reason for them to return.
Now, is the world at large, world powers in particular, ignoring the plight of Rohingya? And, is there anything the world out there should be doing to try and bring this crisis to a solution?
Definitely. I mean, there has to be more of an international push, because if we look at the R2P, or the responsibility to protect, that was signed by nations of the United Nations, they're saying that genocide, crimes against humanity, and those things are the problem of the entire international community. So there has to be, a more concerted effort, an arms embargo, international boycott. The Burma Task Force has actually put out a dirty list, which basically says these are the companies who are doing trade with Myanmar and with the military, and we should try to boycott them. And it's going to take a push from civilians for us to actually get the result that South Africa had many years ago.
Now, just looking at the United Nations and them labeling the offensive on the Rohingya a textbook example of ethnic cleansing, mentioning soldiers accused of rape, murder and burning down Rohingya villages whose responsibility is it to make sure that the alleged perpetrators are brought to book?
I think it's the international community's problem. I mean, apart from the International Criminal Court, various countries that do trade with Myanmar, that train their military, that have opened up business, and since there's an open government now, all these countries are responsible, and all these countries need to move forward. And saying that we do travel bans or pick one or two military officials is just not sufficient. I mean, in 2017, when all of this was happening, South Africa okayed a sale of weapons to Myanmar. That's unacceptable on our side.
Advocate Mayet, thank you so much for joining us. We'll leave it there for now. That is human rights activist, Advocate Shabnam Mayet, joining us via Skype.